One of my favorite memories growing up as a kid is being in a dark movie theater and watching Walt Disney's animated classic The Lion King in 1994. So even right now, I have this really vivid memory of watching that first scene, with the sunrise and the opening song, and tears just coming to my eyes because of the sheer beauty of the thing. And so given all that, I'm really excited to be able to take the time right now to show you how this particular movie actually helps to expound upon the deeper meaning behind this weekend's gospel, which is taken from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 28. So even though I'm almost positive that everyone watching this now has seen The Lion King at least once, if not like 20 million times, I'd like to take the time in any case to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the basic plot and narrative structure of the film. And so the movie basically revolves around this cute little cub named Simba, who's being groomed by his father Mufasa to eventually become king of the Pride Lands. But then early on in the film, Mufasa is actually killed by his brother Scar, who then tricks Simba into believing that he actually killed his father. So as a result, Simba basically banishes himself to the desert, then to the jungle, where he meets two smaller animals, these two guys named Timon and Pumbaa, who basically teach him to live according to a new philosophy of life, embodied by this song called Hakuna Matata, which is Swahili for no worries. Now what's interesting about this particular song, and this is part of the reason why the movie is so great, the song itself is actually a bit of a red herring. And so basically because the song is so fun and so upbeat, a lot of people are misled into thinking that Hakuna Matata is actually a really good way to live life. In other words, a lot of people listen to that song and they think to themselves, well, yeah, I guess that's the way you're supposed to live. No worries, no duties, no responsibilities, no cares in the world. Whereas, of course, the reality is actually quite different. And what's interesting is that if you actually follow the movie along and you follow what happens to the different characters, it's pretty clear that what the movie is saying is that you're actually not supposed to live according to the principle of Hakuna Matata. Because even though it's true that early on in the film, Simba seems to be having a grand old time living in the jungle, like swimming in pools, swinging on vines, and eating bugs and berries and whatnot, as the thing actually progresses, it becomes pretty clear that he is struggling tremendously with deep feelings of guilt and hopelessness and pain, which simply cannot be erased by a life of diversion, distraction, and self-indulgence. But that's why it's so convenient and even providential that later on in the film, near the end of Act 2, this mysterious figure from Simba's past, this shaman character, this monkey named Rafiki, shows up and actually tells Simba that his father is actually still alive. And so you remember how the thing plays out, and certainly it's one of the best scenes in the movie. Rafiki leads Simba through these tangled vines in the jungle before inviting him to look down into what is basically a pool of water. And the expectation is that when Simba looks down, he'll see the image of his father. But then, of course, when Simba looks down, he sees not his father's face, but his own face, as a result of which he is completely crushed and disappointed. But then Rafiki says, no, look harder. So then Simba looks down again, and then the image of his own face changes to the image of the face of his father. And then Rafiki says, you see, he lives in you. And then, of course, Simba looks up, which gives rise to this really beautiful and famous scene where he beholds his father in the clouds. And his father speaks to him, and his father says to him this, Simba, you have forgotten me. And Simba's like, well, no, how could I? But then his father continues, you have forgotten who you are, and therefore have forgotten me. You are more than what you have become. You are my son, and the one true king. And now you must take your place in the circle of life. And with that, the father just disappears. And then almost all at once, Simba comes to the sudden realization, I am not supposed to be here. I am not supposed to stay in the jungle, swimming in pools, swinging on vines, eating bugs and berries. No, I am called to go back to the Pride Lands to fight my Uncle Scar, to fight those darn hyenas, to renew the face of the earth according to my father's salvific purposes and designs, because that is what the son of the king is called to do. And you see, the thing I want to impress upon you is that so it goes with each one of us in the context of the spiritual life. And so, for example, when it comes to the Sacrament of Baptism, one effect of that particular sacrament, which is often overlooked, is the fact that it actually conveys to us this thing called sanctifying grace. And what's sanctifying grace but the life of God dwelling in our hearts? Which means, practically speaking, that we can actually say, in the words of the Lion King, it is my Father's life which dwells in me. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing. But you see, the second thing is this. If it's actually true that we come to share in God's blessed life by virtue of the sacrament of baptism, what that means for us, practically speaking, is that we also come to share in His purposes and we also come to share in His mission, mindful of the fact that the mission of Christ and the mission of the church are both one and the same. Now, obviously, that begs the question, what exactly is the mission of the church? Well, conveniently, the mission of the church is actually clearly defined in the context of today's gospel, which again is taken from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 28, and is commonly known as the Great Commission. And so in the context of the Great Commission, Jesus Christ has obviously come back from the dead, and now He's giving His disciples the mission of the church. So basically what He says to them is, go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Now, in order to fully comprehend the Great Commission, you need to know something about grammar. So I may have mentioned in a previous podcast that before I was a priest, I was a lawyer, but before I was a lawyer, I was an English major. So I find this stuff kind of interesting, but you might find it boring. In any case, we're going to do it. So obviously a verb is an action word, so we all remember that from grade school. But if a sentence has more than one verb, the main verb is this thing called a finite verb. So it's the grammatical hinge of the sentence. The other verbs, if they exist, they're what's called participles. So obviously they modify the overall meaning of the sentence, but they only make sense in light of the finite verb. Boring, I know. But you see, the reason why that's so important is because it actually helps you to figure out the underlying meaning of the Great Commission. Because you see, think of it like this. The Great Commission actually has 4 separate verbs. Go, make, baptize, and teach. Only one of those 4 verbs is the finite verb. The rest are participles. And the reason why, again, that's significant is because once you uncover the finite verb, the grammatical hinge of that particular statement, then you actually discover what is the mission of the Holy Catholic Church. Now, as a bit of a side note, I'll often give some variation of this particular homily when I'm doing baptisms at my parish. And so basically, I'll read this particular gospel, again, from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission. I'll explain the rules of grammar, the finite verb and the participle thing and whatnot. And then I'll ask the people, like, what do you think is a finite verb? Like, what do you think is the main verb of the Great Commission, given the choices of go, make, baptize, and teach? And it's kind of interesting. Most people will guess baptize or teach, which shouldn't be a surprise because that's what we do as a church. We're good at baptizing, we're good at sacramentalizing, and we're good at imparting information, we're good at teaching. The answer, though, is make. The finite verb in that statement of the Great Commission is make. Make disciples. That is the mission of the church, in service of which is the going and the baptizing and the teaching. And obviously that begs the question, what does it mean when we talk about being a disciple? Well, for us, I might suggest, we're so used to the terminology of being a student, but being a student is a very different thing than being a disciple. The goal of being a student basically is to know what the teacher knows. So insofar as I know what the teacher knows, I'm a good student, but discipleship is different. Discipleship, the whole goal is not simply knowing what the teacher knows or knowing what the rabbi knows. The goal of discipleship is to actually become the rabbi. And so given all that, if the mission of the church is to make disciples of all nations, again, in service of which is the going and the baptizing and the teaching, and the whole goal of discipleship is to become another Christ in this world, beginning with myself, well then as a baptized person, sharing in God's blessed life, sharing in His purpose, sharing in His mission, I am called to give myself completely over to that particular purpose, over to that particular mission, to go forth and make disciples of all nations, again, beginning with myself. But you see, to tie it back to the Lion King, you got to appreciate how radical an idea this is, especially when compared to the predominant philosophy of this world. Because if you think about it, what does the world say? The world says peace obtains when there is the absence of war, when there's the absence of conflict, when there's a certain set of external circumstances, perhaps, that you just maintain for the rest of your life. Whereas in contrast, what does the church say? The church says that the peace of Christ, the peace that you're looking for, the peace that will persist in the midst of storms, is only obtained when you completely give yourself over to God's life, to His purposes, and to His mission. Or to frame the thing in terms of the Lion King, you're not called to stay in the jungle. You're not called to live a life of distraction and self-indulgence. You're called to go forth into the Pride Lands, to fight those darn hyenas, to battle against evil, and to renew the face of the earth according to your Father's salvific designs. That's what you're called to do as sons and daughters of Christ the King. And again, the whole idea is that that's not simply the right thing to do. That's the only path to find the peace that you're looking for. And may God bless you all.